And so I thought I would take them up on that, and here are 10 recommendations for me in no particular order, and I have a lot more than 10, but these were 10 that I thought would fit the criteria of movies that matter. First is a series of actually 3 films. Only one could probably be shown if it was chosen. These are films by an Indian director, Satyajit Ray, made in the 50s. It's called the Apu Trilogy, or the World of Apu. The first is Pather Panchali, which would probably be the one to show. Then Aparajito, the second film, and then the third, The World of Apu. These follow a young Indian boy. He's a kid, maybe 5 or 6 years old in the first film, and he's in his early 20s in the third film. If Italian neorealism took film out of the studio into the street to present reality on the screen, then Ray's films certainly added poetry to that idea of neorealism. My second recommendation would be The 400 Blows by Francois Truffaut. Truffaut had been a film critic in the 1950s for a French film journal called Cahiers du Cinéma. He and the other film critics at that film journal all decided that they could make better movies than the French studio system in place at the time. And they then proceeded to do that. This was called the New Wave, or the Nouvelle Vague, to use the French term. And The 400 Blows was the first feature film of the New Wave. It is a beautiful film. It is a poetic film. And it borrows a lot from neorealism and presents sort of what life, in a sense, on the streets of Paris would be in 1959. Third, Olympiad by Leni Riefenstahl. Now, this is a documentary film. It's actually 2 parts of the 1936 Berlin Olympics. Now, the film was, in fact, part of the Nazi propaganda to sell, Nazi ideals. And some people will not watch the movie for that very reason. But it is a beautiful film about sport and about the 1936 Olympics. And there's stunning footage in it of Jesse Owens, for instance, winning his 4 gold medals. So even though it was used to bad end, it really is a beautiful film that says a lot about the ideal of sports. Four, A Hard Day's Night, directed by Richard Lester. This was the film that really sort of sold the Beatles as a visual, as a group. This film, which is ostensibly sort of a docudrama about the Beatles, it really is not, shows Lester at the sort of the height of his own particular form. And Lester's film vision of the Beatles really is sort of almost like a prelude to what would become music videos and MTV. It's a beautiful film. It's very funny, and of course it has great Beatles songs. Next, Early Summer by Yasujiro Ozu. Robert Butler has one of Kurosawa's films, another Japanese director. Ozu's films are almost all what he called salaryman films. They're films about the Japanese middle class. And I would go further than that. With a couple of exceptions, all of Ozu's movies are pretty much exactly the same movie made again and again and again. That said, every time you see an Ozu movie, it's like you've gone into a magic world. This particular film features his 2 main actors who appear in almost all his films, Setsuko Hara and Shishu Ryu. These 2 actors play the same roles they generally play. He plays a kindly old father, she plays his daughter, and in this particular film, it's all about trying to find her a husband. And it's a beautiful film, very sympathetic. It's just a wonder to see. Next, A Matter of Life and Death by the two directors, Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger. Now, Powell and Pressburger were a team in Britain from the 30s through the 60s. And they made lots of films together, and their films are visually stunning, largely because they had an American cameraman, Jack Cardiff, who did the cinematography for their films, and their films are just unbelievable to see. Other people would say, well, The Red Shoes is a more important film, and they're probably right. But A Matter of Life and Death, which is filmed in black and white and color, presents a view of life here on Earth as being in Technicolor, whereas Life in Heaven is presented in black and white. It's a beautiful film, it's a romantic comedy, and it is well worth your time. Once you've seen it, you will never forget it. Out of the Past, directed by Jacques Tourneur. Tourneur is sort of a standard director for Hollywood. So in that sense, this is somewhat out of keeping with the rest. But Out of the Past, I think, is the definitive film noir. I mean, film noir was a big genre in American films in the late 40s and early 50s. These were mainly crime dramas, and not always, though. Out of the Past features Robert Mitchum as the detective who is sent to track down a woman who's taken it on the lam. When he finds her, of course, he falls in love with her, and she, of course, the typical femme fatale, and that sort of meeting sort of ruins his life. This is a very much the sort of thing you see in film noir, and Turner's handling of the story is quite stunning. It's also an early Kirk Douglas film. He plays a wonderful job as the guy that the woman who hired Robert Mitchum to find the girl. The Searchers by John Ford, that stars John Wayne. Now, westerns, of course, are a staple, and Stagecoach, perhaps, is the film if you want to see sort of an idealistic western by John Ford. The Searchers, done in the 50s, is a much more cynical take on the western genre. John Wayne does not play a particularly nice character, and this is because it actually sort of stretches the western genre out. I think it's a film well worth seeing. Laventura, The Adventure, by Michelangelo Antonioni. Butler had Bicycle Thief, which is a film of the early neorealist period. By the early 60s, Italian cinema had taken on a much slicker look. And this film, Laventura by Antonioni, definitely has that. It's all about the ennui of modern life. And one might say, well, it's not really a film that has a whole lot of action. And yet, every single time that I watch this film, I am mesmerized. It is a film in which, despite the title, The Adventure, nothing sort of really happens. And yet I can't look away. And finally, two films, either one of them could be really sort of shown, because in a sense they were made almost at the same time by the same director, and they really tell the same story. It's almost like part one and part two. And this would be Frankenstein and then The Bride of Frankenstein, directed by James Whale. Whale was an art director himself. He had training on the stage, and you can see that in this film. But the film is significant not just because of his tremendous art direction and the beautiful cinematography of the film. I mean, they really are stunning to look at. But because these were the films, especially Frankenstein, that really started Universal down the road, that it continued really for the next couple of decades, where it was the studio that produced monster movies. And so as a sort of, a groundbreaking monster movie, that's why I've included it here. But it is visually stunning and well worth seeing. So those are my 10 recommendations. If whether the library actually starts showing some of these or not, I highly recommend getting them on DVD or video and watching them yourself. All of them are worth seeing.